All right, so here's a fun word for you, graphophonemics. Um, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this particular subject this semester, but I do think it's important for you to kind of have it as a baseline. So it's a little bit outside of the purview of traditional grammar, but I do think it's important for us in terms of understanding like words and what we're talking about with language. So any of you working with little kiddos should also find this a bit useful. Um, so I think we tend to think about words or language as the set static thing that happens in one way, and it doesn't. There are various components that go into thinking about speech and thinking about written text. And so talking about graphophonemics should help in terms of distinguishing those. So we're going to start by talking about phonemes. Um, and what a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound in a language. And I am going to give you a couple of different examples, right? So think about the sound, right in here. Um, that can look a variety of different ways in terms of English. So we might have a C, we might have a K, we might have a CK, and all of those make that same sound. So is a phoneme. Um, we have a variety of different words, and I will give you a couple of examples. So I might say tick. I might say talk. I know I'm spelling it weird, but TikTok, I'm pretty sure is spelled that way. Or I might spell talk the more traditional way with the CK. Either way, all of them have the same phoneme, which is right. So it's hard sometimes to represent sound because our alphabet is not phonetic. But phonemes are those smallest units of sound. So the sound is what we're talking about when we're talking about a phoneme. Now, here's where things get interesting, right? A grapheme is going to be a little bit different. A grapheme is going to be the smallest unit of a written language. So here we are not talking about, oh, I'm spelling language horribly. We're not talking about sound. We are talking about symbols, right? We're talking about the symbols that we use to often represent sounds. Okay. So here, in terms of talking about graphemes, that is actually going to be a C, right? Or a K. Um, when we put a C, K together, right, we are making use of two different graphemes. But what they allow us to do, right, is they allow us to put sounds into language to start creating words, right? So all words are made up of graphemes. So for instance, we might have tick, talk, right? These are words made up of graphemes. Or we might have a word like TikTok, right? Which is going to also be considered a proper noun, which is a little different, but I think it's fun to kind of throw it in. So when we're talking about graphemes, we're functionally talking largely about the alphabet. Not simply that, there are other characters or symbols that can represent sounds that we use in language. But for our purposes, it's kind of good to be aware, right? There's a difference between the sounds that we hear, the phonemes, and the graphemes that we use to represent them. So something like the alphabet. Now, the last thing that it's important to be aware of and to kind of think about are what are called morphemes. And especially for anybody who's working with kids as they get a little bit older, this can be super helpful, especially if we're talking about vocabulary. So, a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. Okay. And I am just going to go ahead and give you a couple of examples. Um, so A, right? There are two different sounds or phonemes in English, a and a, right? Both of those go with the grapheme A. However, A on its own, right, also is a morpheme that has meaning. It is traditionally used as a prefix that means at the beginning of a word, and it usually means not, right? That's the meaning of the letter A, like on its own, as we tend to pair it with other words. So let me give you a few examples. Asynchronous, right, means not at the same time. At the same time. Okay. A symmetrical, right, means not, I'm just gonna go with symmetrical. Okay. But as you even like see, right, we have words like or I should say, um, we have morphemes like morph itself, right? Morph means to change, right? So you can think about words like morphology, right? Or like the word morpheme, which has to do with meaning, but kind of that change in meaning. So it's useful to be aware, right, that language functions on a variety of different levels. And that includes sound, symbol, and meaning. And so I will scroll back up to the top here. And under graphophonemics, I'm just going to write that it refers to the relationship between sound, symbol, and meaning. And we need all of those things to ensure that language operates.